Hi guys, thank you for joining me for lab exercise 3 where we're going to learn about biomolecules. Don't forget to keep this sheet and use it for your lab quiz. Now your lecture quiz is due every week Friday at 5 p.m. and it is closed note, but your lab quiz is open note. You can use these notes to take your lab quiz. Up at the top is my list of materials, and I already have all of my materials gathered here, including a triple beam balance. So we have that part done. What we're going to learn today is we're going to learn about the 4 major biomolecules. We're going to model a polymer, and then we're going to create a synthetic polymer. We're going to read nutrition labels and extrapolate data from that label, and then we're going to consider the dietary needs of different individuals. So we're going to go through those different things. In this first section, it's called organic molecules. Organic molecules are the molecules which exist within all living things. They are life's building blocks, and all organic molecules contain carbon. All things are, there are 4 major categories of organic molecule: carbohydrate, lipid, protein, and nucleic acid. They have 4 common characteristics. First, we already mentioned they contain carbon, okay? And they are also formed with just a few elements. So usually they're made up of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and the nucleic acids have nitrogen in them. Proteins also have a nitrogen group. Lipids can sometimes have a phosphate group. So we're going to go over those different groups and those different characteristics. They are all made up of monomers or single subunits and linked together into long chains called polymers. So we're going to go over the different monomers and the different polymers of these different groups. Number 1 says cut out the images from the last page and glue them in the correct place in this diagram. So if you turn to the back, the last page, or the second to last page in this case, has this hamburger on the top of it. I've already cut the bottom of this page off, and I've cut out these strips. So we are going to glue those to this diagram, to this graph right here. So what I need for this exercise is just glue and scissors. So first we're going to be talking about carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are made up of sugars. So if I'm talking about the monomer of a carbohydrate, I'm going to be talking about a ring of carbon. Carbohydrates only have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. You're not going to see any nitrogen. You're not going to see any phosphate in it, or the most simple forms. There is phosphorylated glucose, but we're not going over that. The carbon ring should have only carbon, hydrogen, oxygen in it. So I'm going to cut this and glue it right here to the monomer. Now, when we bind 2 of these together, we end up with a disaccharide. So this would be a monosaccharide. If I had 2 of these, it would be called a disaccharide. And they're linked together with dehydration bonds. When I have a whole bunch of these linked together in a long chain, it's called a polysaccharide or a polymer. In animals, this can look like this. This is a picture of glycogen. You notice that it has these branched chains. So each individual circle here represents a glucose, and then the linkages can be branched, and this is an example of glycogen. Other branched carbohydrates, for instance, amylopectin, may be made by plants, but animals tend to make glycogen. Plants tend to make starches, which are single chain. They're not branched. They're single long chain polysaccharides or polymers. So the polymer of a carbohydrate would be this picture right here. Now, if I'm looking for an example of a carbohydrate, if you've ever heard of carb loading, carbs we find in breads and pastas and grains and sugars. So this would be an example of a carbohydrate. Here we have bread. That's an example of a long chain carbohydrate. Lipids. Lipids are made up of fatty acids. So if we look at our examples here, this would be an example of a fatty acid. So I'm just going to cut it out. Now, a fatty acid only has carbon and hydrogen in it. We have a long chain of carbon and hydrogen. And if there's no double bonds in this long chain, we call it a saturated fatty acid because it's saturated with hydrogens. These are usually solid at room temperature because there's no kinks in it, so it stacks very easily on top of itself. Now we do see oxygen over here, and this is where it might join to a glycerol group. Okay, this one is just the fatty acid by itself, so it doesn't have a glycerol on the end of it. So this would be the monomer of a lipid. If I'm looking for the polymer of a lipid, I'm going to be looking for a whole bunch of fatty acids that are linked together. And I see that in the phospholipid bilayer of our cells because we have the glycerol that's connected to the fatty acid tails. So what we just saw, this fatty acid is represented by these yellow lines here. And the top is actually connected to glycerol, which in the case of our phospholipids is a phosphorus. A phosphorus is connected on to that glycerol. The phosphorus actually likes water, it's hydrophilic, but the tails, these fatty acids, they hate water or they're hydrophobic. And that's because these hydrogens are bound to the carbons in a non-polar fashion. So there's no electronegativity, so it's not going to mix with water very well. And that's great for our cells because we have an aqueous solution outside of our cell and an aqueous solution inside of our cell. So we don't want those to mix. So we get this bilayer. So we're going to put that in the example of under the polymer for lipids. Now, if we're looking for an example of lipids, we see lipids in our diet a lot. We don't just see them in our cellular membrane. If we're looking for lipids that are in our diet, things like omega fatty acids in fish, oils have saturated fatty acids. Nuts also have a lot of fatty acids. Avocado has fats in it. Those are all different examples of lipids. Another example of a lipid might be a wax. Wax is also a type of lipid. All right, let's talk about proteins. If we're talking about the monomer of a protein, then we specifically need to be talking about an amino acid. We've heard the word essential amino acid before, and an essential amino acid is an amino acid that we can't create in our own body, so we have to get it from our diet. If you eat meat, this is not a problem because all meats have essential amino acids. But if you avoid meat, then you're going to have to get your diet from various different areas, a mix of nuts and beans and other protein-rich foods in order to get all of your essential amino acids that you cannot make in your own body. Now, there are other amino acids that you can make in your body, and they all look like this. There's a central carbon, and that carbon combines an amine group. The amine group has a nitrogen in it. And it also has a carboxylic group. This is a carboxylic group. You see it's double bonded to an oxygen and a hydroxyl here. This hydroxyl will bind to the next amine in the next amino acid, creating a long chain. Now you notice this R. R does not represent an element like the rest of these do. R represents just an R group or an off chain. And the R group on each amino acid is unique. So the properties of each amino acid is unique. This R group might be very electronegative. It might be very electropositive. It might be polar, meaning that it mixes well with water. It might be nonpolar, meaning that it avoids water. So this R group will determine the properties of the protein when the protein is chained together. So this is the monomer of a protein. So I'm going to glue it right here. Now, when we get a whole bunch of amino acids linked together, we get something called a polypeptide. It's called a polypeptide because they're linked together with peptide bonds. And this can then fold into different shapes, leading to an overall functional protein. Now, once it gets to the tertiary and quaternary structure, we need some assistance from different organelles or different proteins within the cell to help it get to this point so that it can be a functional protein. But overall, it's made up of different amino acids, and the properties of those amino acids will determine how it folds in on itself. So this would be the polymer of the protein. Now, if I'm looking for an example of protein, the best place to find protein is meat, but that's not the only place to find protein. We can find protein in dairy products, and we can also find them in nuts and beans and lentils. So we can find protein in several different places to make our diet more balanced. Okay. Last is nucleic acids. Nucleic acids are made up of nucleotides, or a nitrogenous base. A nucleotide is a nitrogenous base connected to a sugar phosphate. In DNA, the sugar is called deoxyribose. It lacks an oxygen, but it's always connected to this phosphate, and then the phosphate is connected to the next sugar, creating that polymer chain. But let's talk about the nitrogenous base. Now, this image isn't super detailed, but there are 4 different nitrogenous bases that we find in DNA, and they are made up of mostly nitrogen. Carbon, we said, makes 4 different bonds. Nitrogen only makes 3 different bonds. But it's still a useful element for our nitrogenous bases, for our DNA. And this is what gives us the instruction manual for life. This is where our genetic material is stored, in the repeating pattern of nitrogenous bases. So we have adenine and thymine, which bind together with 2 hydrogen bonds. And we have guanine and cytosine, which are always matched together with 3 hydrogen bonds. If you want to know more about that, make sure to watch the lecture video. In RNA, which is also a type of nucleic acid, we have ribose sugar. Okay, it's still connected to a phosphate though, and we still have adenine, guanine, and cytosine, but instead of thymine, we have uracil, and uracil looks very, very similar. The structure is very similar to thymine, so they're interchangeable. Now, when these are linked together in long chains, it looks something like this, where the sugar is connected to the phosphate is connected to the sugar, and so on and so forth, creating this sugar phosphate backbone. And then the nucleic acids, or the nucleotides at the inside, are going to determine the pattern or the genetic code. So like we said, adenine always binds to thymine with 2 hydrogen bonds, and guanine always connects to cytosine with 3 hydrogen bonds. And this one subunit is a nucleotide. So the monomer in this case would be the nucleotide, and the polymer in this case would be the long chain DNA. So I'm going to put the DNA right here, and I'm going to put the nucleic acid right here. An example of a nucleic acid, of course, would be our genetic material. It's found in the nucleus of all of our cells. Your eyeball has the exact same DNA as your stomach. One produces stomach acid and one does not. It just depends on how your body uses that DNA. But all your cells have all of your DNA. If it's folded up really tight, it looks like a chromosome. And we'll talk about DNA more when we get into the genetics unit. So I'm going to glue that right here as our example of a nucleic acid. So your first page should look something like this. Let's go to the second page, and let's talk a little bit more about polymers. So polymers, like we mentioned, are long repeating chains of subunits called monomers. Proteins, for instance, are long chains of amino acids. In this exercise, we're going to create a model of a polymer using marshmallows and toothpicks. So it says, take a single mini marshmallow. This is our monomer, or represents our monomer. We are going to use a toothpick that represents the bonds between the monomers, and we're going to link them together in long chains. So here I have my long chain linked together. So I have only single bonds, but you see that they fold up pretty nicely and still stick together. And polymers do have that flexibility, or most polymers have that nice flexibility. Since they're long chains, they're usually pretty flexible. It says continue building with these marshmallows one by one until you end up with a long chain polymer. So one thing that I could do is I could make this polymer really, really, really long, okay? I could make it a very long chain. Or I could do something else. I could make it branched, okay? That would represent like a glycogen maybe, if it were branched instead of a single long chain like a starch. So this would represent a starch, long chain, and then this would represent a glycogen, a branched chain. Another thing that polymers can do is something called cross-linking. So if I have these polymers stacked on top of each other, there is a chemical reaction that can cause cross-linking. And cross-linking would be when these long chain polymers link together to make sheets of polymers, or polymer sheets. And you're going to find this in synthetic polymers like plastics and textiles. So these sheets of polymers are really, really useful, and they're also really stretchy. They stretch in any direction. They're going to stretch in any direction. They're really flexible, unless they're cured like plastics. Plastics can get hard. But we are going to learn about those different polymers in the next section, but let's answer these questions first. It says, how does the structure of the polymer model you created compare to the structure of real-life polymers? Well, we already did that when we talked about long chain starches or branched chain carbohydrates like glycogen. The next one says, can you think of real-world examples where the structure is critical to its function? Well, one real-world example would be enzymes. Enzymes have to have a very specific shape in order to produce a specific function. So proteins definitely have a structure-function relationship. If you change the structure of a protein by denaturing it, maybe with heat or an acid, you're going to change its function. It's no longer going to function properly. So that's the answer for those two. Let's talk about making a synthetic polymer. Synthetic polymers are fascinating materials composed of long chains of repeating units. These versatile compounds have a wide range of application in everyday life. You can even create synthetic polymers at home using everyday ingredients. PVA, or polyvinyl acetate, is found in school glue. We're going to use Elmer's glue. Okay, I found that Elmer's glue has the most PVA in it. Other off-brand glues may not have as much PVA and not work as well. Something like boric acid can be found in products like contact solution or laundry detergent. And so we have some borax right here, which is used in laundry detergent. We're going to see how these two react to each other. The boric acid acts as a cross-linking agent. So let's look at this image right here. This image is of PVA, and you see that PVA has these long chains, and they're kind of slippery and they move past each other. And in glue, this is really nice because it's flexible when it's in liquid form, but once it dries out, it becomes very, very sticky. Well, boric acid can react and cause cross-linking between the PVA polymers, creating this net or this sheet of polymer. So that's exactly what we're going to do by following these directions. I'm going to read the directions out loud while I perform the experiment. So I'm no longer going to show you my sheet, but let's go ahead and get our ingredients together. Here I have a triple beam balance. And the first step says to add your whey boat to the triple beam balance. We're going to be using just an empty 2-ounce portion cup, and we're going to add it on there. And you notice that when I added it on there, it no longer reads 0. So what I have to do is move these weights until this reads 0. So I'm going to do that right now. If I move this gram weight, I don't think it weighs very much. Okay, not quite there. All right, now I have 2 grams, just 2 grams of counterweight, and now it reads exactly 0. So 2 grams of counterweight. So now I know my weigh boat has 2 grams of mass. The next unit, or the next the next instruction says add 5 grams of mass to the balance. I'm not adding 5 grams of mass here. I'm adding 5 grams of mass here to the counterbalance. So instead of 2, I'm gonna say 7. Now this is way more mass than my weigh boat, but it'll make sense in a second. So what I'm going to do, showing you the whole thing at once, I'm going to add small bits of boric acid or borax to my weigh boat until this is lifted up to 0. So I'm going to do that right now. Okay, it moved up, and that is almost exactly 0. Right here you can see that's 0. So that means I have about 5 grams of borax in my weigh boat. The next section, or the next instruction, says measure 100 milliliters of warm water. So I have my 250 milliliter beaker, but I'm only going to fill it up to the 100 millimeter mark. And over here I have water that's been heating up, and I'm going to use this warm water to heat up my water. So I'm putting it up here just so we can see it really well. And here I'm going to carefully pour it until it reaches 100 milliliters. I think I overheated this water a little bit, but there's 100 milliliters. And it says to add my borax to my water and stir until it's dissolved. I want it to completely dissolve. I don't want any extra borax undissolved. And it should turn a clear color. It started out cloudy white, but it's getting clear. Again, I want it to cool down a little bit. I think I overheated it. But there, it's pretty clear. I'm swishing it around just to cool it off a little bit. The next step is to take your glue. You don't have to do anything special to your glue, Elmer's glue. You can use school glue. It doesn't have to be sparkly. And we're going to drip it into the borax solution, or the boric acid solution. All right, and I'm going to take my stirring rod and try to fish it out of there. I got some on the sides, I didn't intend to, but let's fish it out. Now, this is no longer glue. It's now more of a slime. It's stretchy, it's not sticky. You see, it's not sticking to my hands. It is very stretchy, and it's very fun to play with. This is the same way that you make slime, okay, but we're making like worms. So this is very, very fun, sticky stuff. You can actually roll it into a ball, and it's not sticking to my hands too bad, a little bit. I'm gonna put it back in the water because I think I've released some of the glue that was on the inside of the little worms. And getting that out of there. I have a nice little bouncy ball. Oh, it bounced. I wish I could show it to you. Let's see if I can show it to you. It's bouncy. So this is the same way that we make a lot of different polymers. This PVA reaction is really common with making glue, making slime and bouncy balls and other interesting things. All right, let's get back to our worksheet. Okay, our worksheet, we've finished this part. Now it says, when you observe and handle the glue worm, what physical properties do you notice and how do they differ from the properties of glue? Well, if I put this glue in my hand, it would be really sticky and messy. But this one is not super messy. I can bounce it, I can stretch it. It has lots of different properties that the original glue PVA did not have. What role does the process of cross-linking play? Well, the cross-linking is going to help the synthetic polymer stick together in these sheets. All right, let's look at the back. It says calculating caloric value. We're calculating caloric value. We here are going to look at a salad and the ingredients of a salad and find out how many calories are in this salad. Now, you can either scan this QR code to find the caloric calculator, or we can just follow this rule. 1 gram of fat contains 9 calories of fat. 1 gram of protein contains 4 calories of protein, and 1 gram of carbohydrate contains 4 calories of carbs. Now, calorie just is a rough estimate of how much energy is in that molecule. So how much energy is your body going to get from that chicken or from that crouton? So in our salad, we have grilled chicken. Grilled chicken has 7 grams of fat, 30 grams of protein, 0 carbs, and 0 fiber. So it has lots and lots of protein, great source of protein, but not a very good source of fiber. That's where the salad greens come in. Salad greens is a better source of fiber and carbohydrates, but not very good with protein and fat. Croutons have a lot of fat because it's like bread, buttery bread. Has some protein, but it's mostly carbohydrate and a little bit of fiber. The ranch dressing, however, is where we're going to run into a lot of trouble. It is 15 grams of fat, which is just a ridiculous amount of fat because look, 1 gram of fat equals 9 calories. So that is a high value food. It doesn't have very much protein, doesn't have very much carbohydrate, and has 0 fiber. The shredded cheese is also going to have a lot of fat, but it also has protein in it. Carrots actually end up with a lot of carbohydrates. They're very sweet and they're plant-based, so usually plants are going to have more carbohydrates. So what we're going to do is we're going to calculate the total grams and the total calories of the whole salad. So looking at the fat here, if I add 7 grams of fat with 5 grams of fat with 15 grams of fat with 9 grams of fat with 0.2 grams of fat, I end up with 36.2 grams of fat. What I'm going to do is look at my chart and multiply it by 9 calories. If I multiply this by 9, I get 325.8 calories, not grams. That's calories just from fat. Now imagine if you're on a 2,000 calorie per day diet. That's going to be a large portion of your diet right there, just from a salad. The protein, if I add 30 plus 1 plus 2 plus 1 plus 7 plus 9, I end up with 41.9 grams. So I have more protein than I have fat. But look, 1 gram of protein only contains 4 calories, whereas 1 gram of fat contains 9. So I'm going to multiply this number by 4, and I get 167.6 calories. Carbohydrates, if I add up all the carbohydrates, I end up with 21.7 grams of carbohydrate. I'm going to multiply that by 4, and that means I have 86.8 calories from carbohydrates. Now my fiber, I can add up my fiber and see that I have 4.6 grams of fiber, but we don't consider that to be any caloric value. Fiber is important for your diet though. It helps your digestion. So my total calories for this grilled chicken salad, if I add all of these calories up, is 580.9 0.2 calories. If I'm on a 2,000 calorie per day diet, that's already a quarter of my value for the whole day. So I could eat 4 salads in one day, and that's it. So this is a really high calorie diet. If I consider caloric density, where certain ingredients have more calories per gram than others, how does this ingredients like cheese and salad dressing compare to nutrient-dense elements like the vegetables and chicken? Well, I would say that the ranch dressing and the shredded cheese have a lot of fat, which has more calories per gram than, say, the protein in the chicken. So if I were to easily reduce the caloric value of this salad, I might switch from ranch dressing to maybe a vinaigrette dressing or just not any dressing at all, because that's just a lot of caloric value right there from the fats in this salad. And you don't normally think of a salad as being high fat content, but look, most of these calories in this salad came from fat, 325 calories just from fat, and most of that came from the salad dressing. Number 2 says some ingredients like salad greens and carrots have very low caloric value, but these low calorie ingredients would make your perception of the salad be perceived that the whole salad might be low calorie, but the whole salad is not low calorie. Just the salad greens and the carrots are low calorie. They're also high in fiber. So you're getting fiber from just the salad greens and the carrots. You're not really getting calories from it. So if I were to change my salad, I might increase the salad greens because it's a really good way to get low calories but high fiber and high nutrition density. Number 3, people often customize salad with additional ingredients, more dressing than recommended. Maybe they add bacon bits. Those would probably be not good decisions if I'm trying to create a high nutrition, low calorie food. Now, I'm not proposing that anybody has to change their diet. I'm just letting you be aware. If you're choosing salad because you think you're choosing the better choice, make sure that you're not including something like a high fat dressing. If I want a nutrient dense salad, then I would choose something with more salad greens and less fat, like the croutons and salad dressing. All right, let's go to the back. The back is talking about reading a nutritional label, and this nutritional label has lots and lots of good information. Not only does it have all of the ingredients listed here, it also has all of the nutritional facts, and this particular one, not all of them, but this particular one tells me how many calories I get per gram. So I get 9 calories from fat, I get 4 calories from carbohydrates, and 4 calories from proteins. It also tells me my daily intake or my normal daily percentage. So my daily intake of fat is suggested to be below 65 grams. My suggested intake of sodium is suggested to be below 2,400 milligrams, and so on and so forth. So lots of good information here, but what I want to focus on is up here. This says that one serving size is 1 ounce or about 11 chips. I don't know about you, but I have never eaten just 11 chips. And these bags or these nutritional labels can be somewhat misleading because they're based on serving size. Well, most people will eat the entire package, and the entire package in this case is 16 ounces. 16 ounces, that's 16 serving size. So all of this nutritional value right here, oh, it's only 140 calories. That's not that bad. Multiply that by 16 because it's not 1 serving. It's 16 servings in that bag. So this says, scan the QR code to learn how to read a nutritional label. We just talked about a nutritional label, but if you want to scan the QR code, you can. And examine the label and answer the questions. So the first question, how many calories would you consume if you ate the entire 16-ounce bag? Well, the entire 16 or 1 calorie or 1 serving is 140 for 1 ounce. So I'm going to multiply that by 16. And so I'm going to get 2,240 calories. If I'm at a 2,000 calorie per day diet or around that, I just blew all of my daily value on a bag of chips. So probably not a wise decision if I want to eat more than just chips that day. It says, how much sodium would you consume if you ate the whole bag? Well, let's look at the nutrition label, and it says our sodium is 210 milligrams, or 9% of our daily value. That doesn't sound that bad, 9%, but remember, that is for 1 ounce. If I'm eating the entire 16-ounce bag, I am eating 3,360 milligrams of sodium. That is a ton of sodium. It says, what percent is your daily intake of sodium? Well, we're going to divide that by the suggested daily intake of sodium. So down here it says sodium should be less than 2,400. If I divide 3,360 by 2,400, I end up with 144%. So if I eat this bag of chips, I'm eating 144% of my suggested intake of sodium. So way more than what I should eat in one day. And I've eaten it in one meal. All right, how much saturated fat if you ate 5 ounces? So we're not eating the whole bag, we're just eating 5 ounces. So here we're looking for saturated fat. I find saturated fat right here. It is 1 gram per 1 ounce. So it should be 5 grams. 5 grams of saturated fat. That's not bad. Saturated fat, 1 gram, is 5% of my daily intake. So I'm only consuming, if I just stop myself at 5 ounces, 55 chips, then I've only eaten 25% of my daily value. All right, it says, looking at the ingredients list, what is monosodium glutamate? Well, I can look at my ingredients list and I can see here monosodium glutamate. That is an interesting molecule called MSG. MSG, we've heard of that before. It's found in a lot of Chinese food. That's how it's, known, but it's also found in a lot of vegan food because MSG tastes savory. It's a savory flavor. And it kind of tricks your brain into thinking that you're having a savory meal. And so packaged food like Doritos is packed full of MSG, or monosodium glutamate. The thing is that it has sodium in it. So not that great for you because it has so much sodium in it. But also many people are allergic to MSG and it gives them a headache. So this is an artificial flavor that gives it like a savory, meaty flavor. All right, looking at the bottom, calculate the percentage of your daily intake if you ate the entire 16-ounce bag. So looking at the label, I have 2,240 calories in one whole bag. I'm going to divide that by my daily caloric intake, and I'll get a percentage or a decimal place, just multiply it by 100 to get the percentage. And that is 112% of my daily value. So I'm eating over 100% of my calories just in one bag of chips. The total fat that I have, if I look at the label, I'm going to have 128 grams of fat. If I divide that by the recommended 65 grams of fat, I'm getting 197% of my daily intake of fat. If I look at the proteins, there's not much protein in this meal, okay? I'm calling it a meal because we ate the whole bag. There's only 32 grams of protein in this meal, and I'm recommended to get 50 grams of protein in my daily value. And so that means I have 64% of my daily value protein, which seems like a lot for one meal, which is fine, except that I got 197% of my total fat and 112% of my total calories. So this is a very high fat food and pretty low in the protein value. Carbohydrates. These particular chips are corn chips. So we have 256 grams of carbohydrates. It's recommended that we get 300 grams of carbohydrates per day. So that's 85% of my daily value of carbohydrates. So almost a whole day's worth of carbs. And dietary fiber, only 16 grams of dietary fiber. Very, very little dietary fiber. If we look at this nutrition, only 4% of our daily value for 1 ounce. Remember, it's 16 ounces. So this is 64% of our daily recommended fiber, which is 25 grams. So 64% of our daily intake. So looking at this chart, is it a good idea to eat the entire 16-ounce bag of chips? Well, one 16-ounce bag of chips, which I believe is a family-sized bag of chips, so I'm not trying to terrorize or scare anyone. You can eat the single-serving bags of chips, but an entire family bag of chips is 112% of your daily caloric value. So if you plan on eating anything else that day besides chips, probably best to avoid this. You're also getting a ton of salt, 144% of your daily salt intake, and a lot of fat, almost 200% of your recommended fat. So almost double the fat that you should eat in a day, according to the recommended 2,000 calorie diet. So again, take this with a grain of salt, because on the very last page, it says a bonus. Some people have different caloric needs than others. That 2,000 calorie diet is really just based on generalizations and the average population. Well, what if you're an elderly woman and an older woman, you're not very active, you're gonna need a lot less calories than, let's say, a bodybuilder. A young 20-something bodybuilder is gonna need a lot more protein to help build those muscles. Maybe the woman is going to need a lot of fiber, a dietary fiber to help her digestion. So you can do this activity as a bonus to help you understand the material. I like going to choosemyplate.gov because it has all of the recommended diets parsed out based on gender and age, and also like take that with a grain of salt, because a man who is 20 who doesn't exercise is different than a man who is 20 who is a bodybuilder. So that is different as well. But this is just the recommended general recommendations. It says, how do the nutritional needs of the elderly woman and the male bodybuilder differ? Well, if we did this chart and did this exercise, we would see that not only did the woman need to eat less in general, but she needed to eat different things. For instance, the man was recommended to have a lot more protein. What other considerations go into planning a diet? Well, we don't just consider caloric value, we also consider nutritional value. For instance, those potato chips that we saw, they had a lot of calories, but not very much nutrition. That salad had a lot of calories, but it also was packed with nutrition. So it was a lot more nutrition density. Number 3, explain the role of essential amino acids. Well, when we're building proteins, we can make most of the amino acids, but we can't make the essential amino acids, so we have to get those from our diet, places like protein, meat, eggs, nuts, beans, and lentils. Discuss the primary role of glucose and carbohydrate energy sources. Well, carbohydrates are required to make ATP. We make ATP out of glucose. So we're going to need sugars to be able to perform, to do those things like bodybuilding. Since the woman is not as active, she may not need as many carbohydrates. This is why athletes do carb loading the night before their meets or the night before their events. They may do a spaghetti dinner because those carbs from the spaghetti is really important for energy production, but it does turn into sugars. So if you are diabetic, for instance, you would want to avoid certain carbohydrates because it would transfer into sugar very easily. How might social media influence perceptions of nutrition and caloric value? I have found that social media is very toxic to body image because people are always misrepresenting themselves with either filters or really posing, or just maybe they are just genetically gifted and not everybody is the same. As we've seen from our chart up here, we are going to treat each person individually and treat each person differently based on their nutritional needs. And so the nutritional need of your favorite influencer is going to be different than your nutritional need. So you need to be knowledgeable and to be able to counteract those misconceptions and make healthy choices for your body. The last page here is about a hamburger, and this is about nutritional advertising. I'm not going to do this section, but it just says if you were given this hamburger with this nutritional label, how could you advertise it to make it look more nutritious? What would you advertise? Well, I would say that the carbohydrates give you energy and the meat gives you protein, packed with protein. The lettuce is packed with fiber. I could make this hamburger sound super duper healthy. I would probably gloss over the fact that it's 52% saturated fat. I might just make that super tiny in my advertisement, but I would really advertise that we have 40 grams of carbohydrates and we have lots of protein here, 26 grams of protein, vitamin A, vitamin C, calcium, and iron. Iron is found in red meat. So you could focus on different things to make a food seem more nutritious than it actually is. And food packaging does that. Food packaging tries to misrepresent itself to make it look more appealing to certain populations. So that's the point of the nutritional advertising. But that's it for today. Thank you for joining me. Don't forget to use this sheet to take your lab quiz, and I will see you next week.